Hello, everyone. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives, and it's time for part 28 of my series, Undo the Coup. Undo the Coup ties in so deeply with my father's career and his career at Saxa that I've always just had the feeling that if we could just explore exactly what happened during that time in my dad's career, that we would be able to open up the Kennedy assassination. And I can't believe how important this book is that I just ran across last week. Um, Let me get it in focus for you. Huh, there it is. Expendable Elite: One Soldier's Journey into Covert Warfare by Daniel Marvin. So I've been reading it this weekend and was happy to find a video of Colonel Marvin that I'm going to share parts of with you. So, as we say here, let's go. Hello, once again. I'm John O'Loughlin. My father, Tom O'Loughlin, we came to call him McDuff on the show about 8 years ago, and it has stuck. So, if we're talking about McDuff, we're talking about Thomas F. O'Loughlin Jr., who died on June the 6th, 1971, after 10 years almost of working at a secret organization called SACSA, the Special Assistant for Counterinsurgency and Special Activities. That is a office that was connected directly to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And the purpose of it was to direct special ops and counterinsurgency operations instead of what happened under the Bay of Pigs, which was directed by the CIA. In other words, this was President Kennedy's order, and you all may be familiar with NSAM 55 and 57, which did direct the Pentagon to take over special ops. Of course, the CIA did not want to let go of special ops, and my father was drafted into that SACSA organization as a special ops planner in February of 1962 as it was getting started. He was actually one of the first members of that organization. And it's remarkable that Fletcher Prouty was also there. And it is the organization that was to supplant the earlier Office of Special Operations in which Edward Lansdale ran. So this is the story of SACSA in a way, as well as it is Undo the Coup today on our Monday edition, because it's all the same question. How can we unwrap the actual history of what went on in the Kennedy administration and actually who plotted and who planned and who executed? And more importantly, to undo the coup is to understand that the coup never ended, that the cover up is the coup, and that we today are suffering from the lack of our republic under all of these fake fake news, psychological warfare against the American people, confusing us, driving us into separating. Even this Chinese professor talking about a civil war coming in the next year or two. This is this is insanity. And why? Well, because they still control. They still are pulling the puppet strings. And unfortunately, that goes all the way to the top, no matter who you favor in our political spectrum. All right. I want to start with a little clip from a very important video interview. And I will just start with a clip, and then we'll go back and study it a little bit more carefully. Hang on. All right, this is Daniel Marvin, the author of the book Expendable Elite, published by Trine Day, our good friends at Trine Day, who publish so many great books. And this one also has an introduction by Chris Milligan, and another one by the great Douglas Valentine. All right, so I'm picking this up in the middle just because I want to emphasize this. This is so, so important. Here we go.
I thought the CIA was only supposed to do intelligence gathering. Since when did the CIA actually have control of special forces and could order special forces to, kill people, assassinate people, or, do military operations like that, covert military operations?
All I know is that President Kennedy wanted to take that part of the CIA's operations away from him. That was one of the strongest points behind their work to kill President Kennedy. I know when the CIA instructors, when I was going through Special Forces training, just 2 months after Kennedy was killed, 3 months, we were told how the whole situation was set up with 4 different mafia hitmen, 2 of them from U.S. Mafia, one who I happen to know personally, and another one, and 2 mafia hitmen from the Corsican Mafia, who had set up along sites leading from the ambush site of President Kennedy to the hospital. And they were there with spotters with high-powered binoculars and with orders to kill the president if he wasn't determined to be too far gone to live. And they set up all of that information and procedures. And we were taught in CIA training, in Special Forces training, that the CIA used Green Berets as assassins and terrorists and saboteurs outside of the United States and used mafia inside of the United States. Now that's what Kennedy was trying to get stopped when he got killed. I imagine that is still going on.
Now, I want to go back to Macam because...
All right, I'm going to stop it right there. I imagine that it is still going on. It's going on in spades. It's Murder Inc., times 1,000, whatever you want to say. This is, to me, what Colonel Marvin has written in this book and has just given us there is confirmation that it was not just special operations in the sense of winning hearts and minds and counterinsurgency, being the good guys, as we've talked about in my series on Saxa with General Victor Krulak championing the hearts and minds method versus General Ed Lansdale, the one that Kennedy was pushing out of the business because he was really a CIA guy that used those techniques that were just mentioned by Colonel Marvin. I want to go to his book now on one page because I'm really just excited to put this together. All right, let's bring him off for the moment. So when Captain Daniel Marvin arrives in Vietnam as a special forces captain, he arrives and he meets his team as well as the South Vietnamese team. And he's in a province that is right on the Cambodian border, that is entirely populated by one tribe or clan of people called the Wahao, and that's Hoahao. So the Wahao people are like the whole district. And he is coming in to replace the previous captain of the Special Forces A team right there on the border. And what he runs into is that the South Vietnamese commander there, Major Lee, that's L.E., Major Lee, is concerned that the CIA was going to come back and take over all of the civil action programs that he was running as a Green Beret, because the Green Beret were officially there to win hearts and minds, and that's what Major Lee of the South Vietnamese Army was so successful at, according to this narrative. And I really want to read the whole narrative, but let's just concentrate on this one part, which I'm just thrilled to read. Here we go. So Major Lee is concerned that the CIA would come in and take over, because he knew what the CIA does, and that is the Ed Lansdale version of the CIA, the bad guys. Perhaps seeming to acquiesce to Major Lee, the CIA would, using this covert mission, gain a foothold in the CIDG. The CIDG program is the Vietnamese program. It was started by the CIA, and I'm going to go over to Grok and give you some text that I'm just going to read so I don't have to try to paraphrase. The Central Intelligence Agency initiated the CIDG program in 1961 with roots in late 1961 experiments. It began as a covert effort under the CIA's Combined Studies Division in Saigon. The pilot project started in Vuan Inao village with Rade tribes people. Green Berets provided training and advisory support from the outset, working under CIA direction. In 1963, control transferred from the CIA to the U.S. military's Military Assistance Command Vietnam, MACV, under Operation Switchback. After that, the 5th Special Forces Group ran the program, expanding it significantly, eventually to dozens of camps and tens of thousands of fighters. It ended around 1970 to 71 as part of Vietnamization. Okay, so the important thing is that here we have Major Lee complaining in 1960, this would be in 1966, I believe, that the CIA could, using a covert mission, gain a foothold in the CIDG program, which would then allow the company to again control powerful military paramilitary and irregular forces, and again, shape battle strategy. If successful, would the CIA move to recapture the quasi-military leadership role it once had, using special forces and armed indigenous personnel in overt and covert operations to affect the future in all of Southeast Asia? Only time would reveal the true result of that equation. I hoped more than anything that I would earn the respect of Major Lee and his people. So this is a young but experienced Army officer who, when he was 20 years old, when President Kennedy was assassinated in November of 1963, he was in the Army, and he volunteered for Special Forces because he wanted to wear the Green Beret that President Kennedy had so praised as the elite soldiers that they were. So this young man made a choice to become what he thought would be an elite warrior, never thinking that he was going to be called upon to give up his conscience, to give up his concept of honor, or to go against his faith. But yet, once they get swept into it, the pressure on them is terrific. And I think that is a story that is so important for young people to know, that it can be a trap that's going to send your whole life into uh, a very, very difficult and painful journey. And so I think in the terms of my father, in 1941, he was starting his last year in Harvard. He was a senior and very promising. But when the war drum started beating, he joined the naval, the college recruitment part of the Navy, and then he went directly into the Navy, and his career just ended him up at Saxa, where they had successfully pried control of these special forces in Vietnam away from the CIA. And that is what I think I can claim is a great victory for the good guys that my dad was part of. And I'm just so thrilled to share that with you this morning, March 23rd of 2026, 2 days after my dad's birthday. He would have been 106. I'm going to read the introduction to the book written by Doug Valentine. One Man Who Wasn't. Expendable Elite tells of how, as a Special Forces captain, Daniel Marvin almost became an assassination team leader for the United States government. That experience has affected him for the rest of his life. The book is also a fascinating glimpse into the early years of the Vietnam War, offering a very human story about a man who struggled under perilous circumstances and his quest to find peace of mind. The tale begins at Christmas 1965, when Dan found himself commanding a Special Forces A team in the district of An Phu on the Cambodian border. The war had just heated up, and few Americans knew how to fight a counterinsurgency. The United States Army was looking for the Special Forces to show the way. Dan was in charge of a unit that controlled the civilian irregular troops of the militant Buddhist Hua Hao sect. That is the CIDG, the irregular troops made up of civilians. Dan formed close personal relationships with many of the Hua Haos, but as commanding officer, he found it necessary to maintain more of a distance from his own men to avoid any chance or appearance of favoritism in assigning the often highly dangerous missions. Dan's voluntary assignment included cross-border operations that would extend up to 3 kilometers into Cambodia to seek out and destroy the Viet Cong in their sanctuaries. He also ran intelligence networks inside Cambodia with multiple female agents. At this point in the war, intelligence gathering was an overriding concern, especially to the Central Intelligence Agency. In June 1966, CIA officer Walter McKim visited Dan at his camp in An Phu. McKim asked Dan to develop and execute a plan to assassinate Cambodian Crown Prince Norodom Sihanouk. It was a proposition that would change Dan's life. The pivot point of Expendable Elite is that Dan did not unequivocally accept this request to kill Prince Sihanouk. Captain Marvin put a condition on his acceptance of the mission, that the President of the United States would have to tell the American people that he would allow U.S. forces to attack the Viet Cong in what had been its sanctuaries in Cambodia, such as the one from which the Viet Cong had attacked An Phu with impunity before the A-Team's secret assignment. To this point, and in the face of news reports to the contrary, the Johnson administration had insisted that Cambodia's official neutrality was marked by its refusal of sanctuaries to the Viet Cong, a bald-faced lie. Why did the CIA want the prince assassinated? The CIA's plan was to have the prince killed inside Cambodia, west of the Viet Cong's safe havens, and to make it appear that he was killed by communist forces. Blaming the Viet Cong was expected to make the people of Cambodia look to South Vietnam and the Americans for help in ridding their nation's eastern border area of the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese communists. Cambodia would be transformed from a communist-leaning neutral into an active ally. Lest this seem far-fetched, let me hasten to add that documentation exists that provides details of Operation Cherry, a three-pronged CIA effort to find and assassinate Prince Sihanouk, activated in 1967 after Dan left Vietnam. This and the revelations from the 1976 Select Committee to study governmental operations with respect to intelligence, generally known as the Church Committee, demonstrates the fact that assassination was, in 1966, official CIA policy. Special Forces got this type of job because, as part of its, quote, special capabilities, the Sneaky Petes do things that regular Army outfits cannot. One of these talents is to make an assassination look as if the enemy had done it. Dan's A-Team got the job because their camp was the closest to the possible ambush site on the road Sihanouk would have to travel. The Wahao fighters were well suited to passing themselves off as VC soldiers. On his second visit in June, Walter McKern came to meet with Dan and his Wahao counterpart, bringing topographical maps showing the route the prince would take. The Wahaos would take a captured barge up the Basak River into Cambodia and then on up the Mekong River to a location near the ambush site. The situation came to a climax when Walter McKim came back to Dan's camp just 2 days before Dan's group of 42 irregular fighters were to go into Cambodia, and Dan had not yet heard from his contact at Fort Bragg. Who was to confirm that President Johnson had met the conditions of Dan's quid pro quo. So Dan is like getting ready to jump off with a mission, but he's not going to go into Cambodia without the president acknowledging that, yes, the Viet Cong have sanctuaries right across the river, and that we were not going to let it happen. We were going to fight them, because he knew that if he got over into Cambodia and either got in trouble or perhaps did execute the mission, that he was in a lot of danger, because he was completely off the books. There was nobody was ever going to swear that he, confirmed that he was even there, and he could easily, and his whole team, be disappeared by the CIA. And that's the story that's unfolds in the book. I've read about a third of it so far. So that is what he's most concerned about, is the fact that they're off the books. At any time, the CIA can, get rid of them. Dan immediately confronted McKim with the fact that his conditions had not been met by President Johnson, and McKim refused to even answer, asking Marvin instead if his people were ready to go across the border. Dan, barely able to control himself, ordered McKim out of camp. McKim is a CIA officer, you see. And as McKim was escorted to his White Air America helicopter, he turned, looked at Dan, and shouted, "You can't fight the system, Captain, because you can't win," quote unquote. Wow. Isn't that it all in a nutshell? Is that very few people are going to stand up and stand for their conscience. And most people are so embedded in the system that they have to make that compromise. It's just chilling, because I know that this was my father's work, was to try to win the hearts and minds and fulfill President Kennedy's promise to take these special operations and these assassinations out of the hands of these out of control killers at the CIA. What happened next proved McKim was absolutely right. Dan became expendable for not following what he believed were illegal orders. He, his men, and the Wahao strikers then became the enemy. And except for Dan's courage and convictions and the timely intervention of a high-ranking South Vietnamese general, would have surely paid the ultimate price. Special Forces people often find themselves caught between the rock of unconventional warfare and the dictates of their conscience. They have a dirty job to do, and they are supposed to provide the CIA with plausible deniability, which means they have to carry the secrets for the rest of their lives. In this case, Marvin chose conscience. Decades later, when Dan broke ranks with his special forces in order to reveal the truth, he suffered the wrath of the Special Forces Association. It's hard to imagine just how much misery the SFA put Dan, his family, and his publisher through when Dan published the facts of the CIA assassination mission. Some of the men who were formerly under his command disavowed him, and some, perhaps acting under duress, even went so far as to bring a libel case against him. The SFA-inspired libel case, the Special Forces Association, that is but one example of the fail-safe mechanisms that are built into the system to assure that whistleblowers like Dan Marvin do not tell the truth about America's counterterror war. As in Southeast Asia in 1966, such dishonorable covert tactics are employed in today's warfare, and this is what spurred Dan and publisher Chris Milligan to bring Expendable Elite to print. The U.S. government also pressured Dan's former team members to turn against him. According to Scuttlebutt, some were threatened with the loss of their retirement pay if they so much as spoke to Dan. Other pressures were also brought to bear. One of the individuals told Dan that the act of simply speaking with Dan by itself would derail any chance his son had of being regular Army. Careers were at stake, and these men were told so. For Dan, the price went way beyond his career. His entire livelihood was put at risk. The Special Forces Association, in its quarterly publication, The Drop, said it would provide the attorneys and pay the expenses of the plaintiffs who would take Dan to federal court. Why would the Special Forces Association, nominally a fraternal organization, go to this extent? The answer is that they wanted to hide the facts of what special forces are really involved with in their day-to-day operations as counterinsurgents, terrorists, assassins, and saboteurs. And this is why Dan Marvin's story is so important. It dispels decades of disinformation about the Vietnam War, and it cuts through all the layers of plausible deniability to tell the unsettling truth about how our own government resorts to these methods, not only in its foreign affairs, but in how it will attack an honorable veteran here in the United States in order to preserve the, quote, official story, unquote. In Expendable Elite, you will learn about unbelievable things that were not only possible, but were routine in Vietnam. Many men that have been through these conditions are afraid to come forward with the truth. Well, here is the true story of one man who wasn't, by Doug Valentine. I'm going to go back now to the beginning of that videotape and let the presenter introduce herself and see if we can play some of it back, because it's a great introduction and I want to give her credit for this interview. Be right there. There we are.
Hi, welcome to the Whistleblower Newsroom. I'm Christina Borgeson. Today's guest is dead. He died almost 9 years ago. He called himself Dangerous Dan. During the Vietnam War, Daniel Marvin was a Special Forces captain and an assassination team leader for the US government. He commanded a Special Forces team that controlled civilian or regular troops of the militant Buddhist Hoa Hao sect in the district of An Phu on the Cambodian border. They ran cross-border operations into Cambodia. Remember, the US was not in Cambodia. Remember, we were all told that? Anyway, they ran cross-border operations into Cambodia to kill Viet Cong in sanctuaries there. During that time, the CIA assigned Marvin to assassinate Cambodia's Crown Prince Sihanouk and make it look like the Viet Cong did it in a bid to get the Cambodians to side with the United States in the Vietnam War. For reasons Marvin will explain in his interview, he planned, but then refused to carry out the killing. This sparked a chain of brutal and bizarre events that eventually led to Marvin's transformation from stone cold killer to a born-again Christian who felt compelled to expose his deeply pathological former life. He did this by writing a book titled Expendable Elites that was published by Trine Day Books. So, why am I taking you into Dan Marvin's deep, dark world today? To show you what he wants you to see. He wants you to see the inhumanity, the pathology of war, of unbridled power, of secret government agencies accountable to no one, arrogating to themselves the power of life and death over anyone, anywhere. This all still goes on today, every day, all around the world. But you can't change what you really don't know about, which is why I think Daniel Marvin is an important messenger. What you're going to hear today is the last videotaped interview he ever gave.
I arrived in Vietnam. I volunteered to go there with Special Forces. The day before Christmas, I reported to Colonel William Tuttle, who was the commanding officer of C4, which was the detachment that was in charge of all Special Forces operations in the entire 4th Corps of Vietnam. Colonel Tuttle called me into his office on Christmas morning of 1965 and asked me if I would volunteer to take the independent command at An Phu, Vietnam, which would be the first command that would be permitted to go across the border following the enemy and actually go against the enemy inside of Cambodia. But at the same time, he assured me that there would be no support whatsoever. There'd be no artillery support, no medevac support, no ground support, no support of any kind when we were in Cambodia. And if we were caught inside Cambodia, we would be dropped from the rolls as deserters from the United States Army. And before he was finished talking, he reminded me that it would be as if I never met him when I left his office that day, because this would be a compartmentalized operation. I would be totally in command as an independent operation, and he would never admit that he ever had even asked me about it. So when I left that room, I started in my mind taking mental notes and then transferring them to 3x5 cards throughout my whole time there in An Phu, Vietnam, to protect me should the government decide that I was expendable. And as a matter of fact, in June of 1966, when I refused the request to assassinate Cambodian Crown Prince Sihanouk, that's the, excuse me. We're gonna have to start that one.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
What was I trying to get to there?
You were saying that,
Oh, okay. When I accepted the assignment, I also had the decision to make when Walter McKim brought the request to me to arrange for the ambush and assassination of Cambodian Crown Prince Sihanouk, that once I made up my mind on that and gave him a response to it, that I would suffer any consequences from the United States if I refused to do it. That's why my book is called Expendable Elite. Believe me, we feared absolutely no one except our government should we be declared expendable. Well, when I refused that mission to assassinate Sihanouk because President Johnson refused to act on my quid pro quo which actually was for him to tell the American people that he was not going to allow the enemy sanctuaries, safe havens, or the use of the Mekong River in the future. When he didn't do that, then I unilaterally aborted the mission to kill Prince Sihanouk, and then I put myself in jeopardy, perhaps if you would think so, for the rest of my life.
Now talk about this Johnson's policy. I mean, what are you saying that the president of the United States was giving a safe haven to the enemy? I mean, that sounds outrageous.
When he took over the White House.
I'm sorry, who took over the White House?
When President Johnson took over the White House after John F. Kennedy was assassinated, he arranged verbally, and all those kind of things are verbally so that there's no record of it, for the enemy to have sanctuaries all along the Cambodian border. And he did that by ordering our forces never to fire into Cambodia. And it's a good example of what can happen. On my way to my camp, we flew over a camp called Vinh Cha, which sat right on the border canal between South Vietnam and Cambodia. The captain that commanded the Special Forces team in that camp received a lot of rocket and mortar fire from an enemy battalion that was just on the other side of that canal. Killed 5 of his people right off and wounded a number of them. And he decided that he was going to shoot back at the enemy inside Cambodia, and he did. And he was in prison in Fort Leavenworth within 2 days after defying our government and shooting at the enemy that was killing his people.
Now, why did he create why did he okay these safe havens? I mean, what was the logic behind that?
It sure would be nice to know for a fact why he did it. But one thing for certain is that it was a tactic that was meant not to allow us to win the war. It was strictly for the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese to actually win the war. Otherwise, he would have turned us loose to go after the enemy, no matter where they were, with whatever we had to fight him. My area, where I had an independent command and where I did go into Cambodia against the enemy, was the only fully secure area in all of Vietnam when I turned that camp over to the Military Assistance Command of Vietnam. But it was because we fought the war to win it, and we did win it. We cleared our area of Viet Cong, the enemy. We maintained a secure border. We never lost a battle, even though we were always outnumbered at least 4 to 1 and outweaponed too. But the people that I was fortunate, blessed really to be with, were good fighters, and they were honest people, only wanting to maintain their land and their occupation, which was fishermen and batmen, and which was to farm, have the bats so they could sell guano, the bat leaves, and the pig operations that they had. The Wahows would not eat any beef, period. They were forbidden by their religion, but they would eat everything from pork to rats to snakes to chickens, and it all tasted super.
So I don't know. I still want to go back to this policy because, I mean, obviously it was the U.S. government policy to allow you to exist as special forces going across into Cambodia after the enemy. So why would there be this other policy that would work against what you were doing?
Well, think back to the 15th day of January of 1960. Oh, excuse me, not the 15th. Let me turn aside from that.
Okay. Wait, hold on. Okay, go ahead.
Think back to the 4th day of August of 1966, when General Harold K. Johnson, the Chief of Staff of the United States Army, visited our B team, B-42, in Chow Duck, South Vietnam, and Colonel Brewer, Donald E. Brewer, brought all of us together, all the officers that were in command of camps and that, into the briefing room, and he started to brief General Johnson on the enemy situation and the tactical situation. And on the map in front of him that he was pointing to, there were huge areas inside of Cambodia, some as deep as 3 kilometers, that all were shaded a different color. And General Johnson stopped him, interrupted him, asked him why that the areas were shaded. And Colonel Brewer said, sir, that's because that indicates where the enemy has safe havens. And General Johnson ordered him to remove those from the maps. Colonel Brewer told him, General, those really are sanctuaries, and these men that are behind you can testify to what enemy units are in those sanctuaries. And he interrupted Colonel Brewer again and ordered him to remove those sanctuary areas from the map, saying the President of the United States has told the American people that the Cambodian government does not permit the enemies to use their territory. And Colonel Brewer started to hesitate, and then General Johnson got up out of his seat, walked over, bent over, and said something in Colonel Brewer's ear that caused him to immediately order the operations sergeant to erase all of the safe havens. Now that's the kind of a war that we were fighting over there. I blame General Johnson and General Westmoreland, who in his book, A Soldier Reports, admits that he was ordered not to tell the American people and not to tell Congress not to tell Congress that the enemy had sanctuaries all along the Cambodian border and were allowed to use the Mekong River as their main supply route. Now, who could order General Westmoreland not to tell Congress other than the President of the United States?
I've got to ask you, as a soldier, as an officer, as someone who understands tactics and strategies and so on, as someone who knows what the results of those sanctuaries being allowed to exist, what was the purpose, do you think, of that policy?
I think it was to maintain our presence in Vietnam and to maintain, we believe, now I can't prove this, I can prove that we let the enemy use our river to carry their war goods and allowed them to have safe havens and could shoot at us and we couldn't shoot at them. But we believe, those of us who were in special forces over there, that they used those same ships that carried all of those weapons and ammunition and explosives up to the enemy inside of Cambodia. They used them to bring the drug trade down from Cambodia into the United States.
So you're saying that you think the maintenance of these, and I'm going to ask you to repeat my question if I'm interpreting what you're saying properly. You're saying that these safe havens were maintained so that there could be a drug traffic where arms would go in to the VC, but drugs would come back out to the United States?
I believe that. I can't prove the latter part of it, that they actually had drugs on those ships. But those ships did not come back empty, and Captain Miles, who commanded the A-team on the Mekong River, can tell you that those ships came back laden, just as they were laden when they went up the river, because you can tell where the watermark is on the hull of the ship. So we knew they were bringing something back in, and the only thing we could ever determine from that is that the CIA was using those ships for drug running.
So you're basically saying then that the President of the United States, who was okaying these safe havens, knew that the CIA was drug running?
Oh, I would say so, yes.
Could you repeat incorporate my question into your?
I would say that the whole situation over there was developed to allow our government, through the CIA, to take advantage of the possibility of running drugs using the same ships that were used to carry ammunition and weapons up to the enemy. And I do know this, that when I demanded a quid pro quo in 1966, in June of 66, demanded that President Johnson tell the American people he was going to take away the safe havens that he had authorized in Vietnam. Not that he would have to say that he authorized them, but that he would no longer permit safe havens for the enemy, nor the use of the Mekong River. And with that, I told the CIA, because I had been asked to set up an ambush plan to kill Prince Sihanouk, that I would follow through with that with 42 Vietnamese volunteers if President Johnson would honor my quid pro quo. He would not do it. President Johnson allowed, permitted, whatever word you want to use, the use of the Vietnamese government and the American military to permit the use of ships and airplanes to move drugs out of that area.
Who got the money for those drugs?
I would say the CIA would have been the beneficiary of it, and then they would use it to support whatever they were supporting, legal or illegal. The whole thing about covert operations is that there's never anything in writing. There's never any orders given other than verbally. There's never any backup for you should you get caught. And there's never any government agency that can be caught red-handed with what we were doing. For example, 2 Special Forces A-teams were used by the CIA to meet with Castro and to beat Batista on the ground to take over the government of Cuba, which was a big CIA drug running operation.
What do you mean it was a big CIA drug running operation? How did that work? Yeah.
I don't know how it worked, but I know that that was the reason that they put Castro in power, then he would owe them the right to do what they wanted to do.
And how do you know this? How do you know?
Just from a friend within the CIA, which I could never divulge his name. I knew one of the men that was on the Special Forces A-team. In fact, I taught him in parachute rigger school how to be a parachute rigger. He was part of that organization controlled by the CIA that put Castro into power. Other than that, I can't prove about the drug running. That's so secret. And, you know, like in Mexico, anybody that goes against it's dead. It's, if I knew something, I'd tell you, just the same as I do of what I do know.
Well, I'm so fascinated by the idea that Castro was put into power by American Special Forces when, you know, the Bay of Pigs happened, when, you know, he's been vilified by the American government. You know, how does that work?
It's interesting, the Bay of Pigs. I have my own personal thoughts on the Bay of Pigs. It was set up and failed because President Kennedy finally realized what was going on. You know, when in 1961, I was in France, and I was a European theater air item surveillance officer, and also in charge of logistical support of unconventional covert operations in the European theater for the 10th Special Forces Group. In 1961, I worked with 2 A-teams from the 10th Special Forces and developed a complete plan and program to arm and equip 200 Polish freedom fighters in Poland to fight against the Russians, who was our enemy in those days. And it got to the point, it was all based on a top secret / cosmic orders that I had received to support this operation, which came out of NATO. And with it, we worked together for maybe a few weeks to develop the plan and everything, and had enough Let me have a sip.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. We received an order from NATO to work with the Special Forces. I was, oddly enough, the only officer at the secret Saint Andre depot in France, which was 60 miles west of Paris, that had a top secret cosmic clearance. Now, the cosmic part meant you were able to be involved in NATO top secret operations. So we had it all set up for 200 freedom fighters, weapons, ammunition, communications equipment, and 2 teams of American Green Berets to jump in with that equipment and everything to that unit in Poland. Captain Buck Evans, who was the U.S. Army 320, I mean, U.S. Air Force 322nd Air Division.
Go a lot better. Okay, go ahead.
Captain Buck Evans, who commanded the 322nd Air Division combat control operation out of Evereux-Fauville Air Base in France, had sent in a U.S. Air Force combat control team, dropped them into the area in Poland, which would lead the 2 C-130s in with the supplies and the equipment and the 2 teams of Green Berets. So they were already in on the ground, and about an hour before the C-130 aircraft were to take off with those 2 teams of Green Berets and all those cargo bundles, we got a message, top secret cosmic, from our White House that said to cancel the operation. All we could determine, speaking of we being Buck Evans and myself, was that the president had not known about this operation, and that the CIA was doing this through the 10th Special Forces, which was not unusual. They worked for the CIA, and that he didn't want that to happen because of international repercussions. I don't know that for a fact, but I do know that to this day, to the best of my knowledge, neither Captain Buck Evans nor myself knows the fate of that combat control team that dropped in there to organize those 200 Polish freedom fighters.
All right. I got to stop it there. It's a very well written book, and I may decide to come back on and read some of the book to you, as I love to read books on the show, especially well written ones like this. It's amazing. The narrative really flows. A lot of stories in this book that you'll really be interested in reading. But back to the main reason that I was so thrilled to read these portions of the book is that my working theory has been all along that President Kennedy understood the harm we do with the ugly American approach to counterinsurgency, where we set up internal divisions and they have a war inside the country. This is the style of the British. This is what people like William Donovan learned from the British when the British basically set up our OSS. So this dark side of counterinsurgency is basically all that we know. It's all that there is in our media. But there's always been the good side of counterinsurgency. It's just that you have to let it happen. And it's amazing that in this book, we see this Wahau community was actually making it happen with the help of the Americans, but also with their own indigenous militia, the CIDG. The death of President Kennedy reverses all that and puts anyone who tries to actually establish a happy, independent town, village area is going to suffer, because what they want is the chaos that allows them to transact their transactions in drugs, people, whatever else it is, because it's all just about money for them. Wow. Well, thank you for being with me. It's been an hour, and I've really enjoyed sharing this from Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Marvin, his book, Expendable Elite, One Soldier's Journey into Covert Warfare. What a story.